In 1812, a hand-loom weaver named Samuel Fletcher from Rochdale earned 14 shillings a week producing woolen cloth in his cottage kitchen while his wife carded the raw wool and his eldest son wound the bobbins. 3 years later, the same cloth was being produced by a power loom in a Manchester mill for a fraction of the cost, and Samuel's 14 shillings had become 4. Number 9 on this list is what Samuel did next, and it kept his family solvent through the hardest decade of the Industrial Revolution. Number 3 was practiced openly in every collapsing mill town across northern England and paid enough to bridge the gap between the old economy and the new. And number 1, the method that sustained more ordinary working families through the transition to industrial capitalism than any government program or charity, required no machinery, no capital, and no permission from any mill owner. These are 20 lost trades that kept ordinary Europeans alive during the Industrial Revolution, practiced in the collapsing cottage industries, the new canal navvy camps, and the raw industrial cities of Britain, France, and Germany between 1750 and 1850. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button because what these people understood about economic survival during a total restructuring of the labor market is more relevant today than most people are comfortable admitting. Let us count them down. Number 20. Canal navigation work. Between 1760 and 1830, Britain constructed over 4,000 miles of navigable canals, and the men who built them, the navigators or navvies as they were universally called, formed one of the most extraordinary nomadic labor forces in European history. A navvy earned between 2 shillings and 6 and 3 shillings and 6 per day in the 1790s, significantly better than agricultural wages and competitive with skilled urban craftsmen. The work was brutal, involving the hand excavation of millions of tons of earth with nothing but picks, shovels, and wheelbarrows, and a navvy was expected to move 12 cubic yards of earth per day, a physical standard that eliminated all but the strongest and most disciplined men. But those who could meet it earned enough to send money home to their families, and many saved enough over several seasons to capitalize a small trade or purchase a cottage tenancy. A navvy with ambition and sobriety could progress from day laborer to ganger, a foreman managing a small crew, earning twice the laboring wage and responsible for a section of the canal's construction. The navvy camps that formed around each construction project were self-contained economies with their own food vendors, clothing sellers, and instrument repairers following the work routes, creating a peripatetic market that moved with the construction. In some of the larger canal projects, such as the Grand Junction Canal or the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, the navvy workforce numbered several thousand men working simultaneously, and the ancillary economy that served them was large enough to support dozens of small independent traders. When the canal building boom ended in the 1840s, displaced by the railways, the navvies simply transferred their skills to the new rail construction contracts and formed the backbone of British railway building for the next 30 years. Number 19. Hand-loom weaving resistance. As power looms took over the production of coarse and middling cloth, the most skilled hand-loom weavers retreated into the production of fine muslins, complex damasks, and luxury woven goods that the early power looms could not replicate. A master hand-loom weaver producing fine paisley shawls in Scotland in the 1810s earned between 12 and 16 shillings per week for his most intricate work, while his neighbors, who had stayed in coarse cloth production, were earning 2 and 3 shillings. The specialization strategy gave the skilled handloom weavers an additional 20 to 30 years of viable income and allowed many families to accumulate enough savings to transition into other trades before the final collapse of handloom viability in the 1840s. Number 18. The domestic knitting trade. In the hill communities of Yorkshire, Derbyshire, and the Scottish borders, domestic knitting of stockings and woolen goods remained a viable household income source well into the 19th century because the knitting frame and early mechanized hosiery production could not economically serve the most remote rural markets. A Yorkshire farm woman who knitted stockings could produce 2 or 3 pairs per week and sell them at market for between 1 shilling and 2 shillings a pair, earning 2 to 6 shillings of supplementary income per week in a household where the husband's agricultural wage might run to 8 or 10 shillings in a good season and considerably less in winter. The knitting knowledge was universal in these communities, passed from grandmother to grandchild, and the women who turned it into consistent commercial production were operating small businesses from their own hearthsides with no external dependency beyond the wool merchant's visits. Number 17. The village herbalist and medicine seller. As the Industrial Revolution concentrated population in raw urban environments with no established medical infrastructure, the demand for effective remedies for the new urban diseases, factory accidents, and industrial ailments created a substantial market for anyone who understood herbal medicine and could supply it consistently. A village herbalist who had moved into a mill town could establish a practice in a backstreet room serving factory workers who could not afford a physician's consultation. In the 1820s and 1830s, a successful urban herbalist serving a working-class district in Manchester or Birmingham could earn between 8 and 15 shillings per week from consultations and remedy sales, with portable knowledge, minimal capital, and constant growing demand as the industrial workforce expanded. Number 16. The traveling packman. While fixed shops increasingly dominated retail in growing industrial towns, the vast surrounding countryside still depended on traveling packmen who carried a comprehensive stock of small goods from village to village on their backs or on pack ponies. A skilled packman with an established rural route carried thread, needles, ribbons, small tools, medicines, and printed ballots, knowing his customers personally and extending informal credit to the reliable ones. He earned between 10 and 15 shillings per week net of stock costs on a productive route. When rural customers gained railway access in the 1840s and 1850s, the packman's trade contracted rapidly, but for the first 50 years of the Industrial Revolution, he was the retail supply chain for rural Britain. First pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. Because the next entries describe not how people survived the loss of their existing trades, but how they actively created entirely new income sources by responding to the specific needs that industrialization was generating. The Industrial Revolution destroyed old trades and created new ones simultaneously, and the families who thrived were those who could read the new economy's demands as clearly as the old economy's collapse. Number 15. The Industrial Settlement Shopkeeper. The raw mill towns and colliery villages that sprang up across northern England, the Ruhr Valley, and the Belgian coalfields had no established retail infrastructure, and workers and their families needed food, cloth, hardware, and household goods. A shopkeeper who established a general store in a new colliery village in County Durham in the 1790s faced no competition for the first decade of operation. Prices could be set at 30 to 50% above urban market rates because the alternative for customers was a 6-mile walk to the nearest town. A well-stocked settlement general store in the early 19th century could generate annual profits of £80 to £150, placing the owner firmly in the comfortable middle class of his district. The most successful settlement shopkeepers expanded from a single general store into a small network of specialized shops as the settlement grew, eventually becoming the wealthiest figures in communities that had been raw fields a decade earlier. The pattern was repeated across every industrial district in Britain and Belgium, and the families who moved first into new settlements consistently outperformed those who arrived after competition was established. Number 14. The Industrial Accident Agent. As factory accidents became routine and legally complex, informal agents emerged who helped injured workers and bereaved families navigate the new legal landscape. An agent with basic literacy, knowledge of local magistrates, and the social skill to negotiate between mill owners and their injured employees could earn between 10 and 20 shillings per case. The work was irregular, but demand was constant in any industrial district, and the best agents built regular relationships with factory workers who knew where to find them when accidents occurred. Number 13. Chimney sweeping in the industrial city. The proliferation of coal-burning fireplaces and industrial furnaces created exponentially increased demand for chimney sweeping services, and the master chimney sweep who operated in a productive urban district in the 1810s and 1820s earned between 15 and 25 shillings per week. When legislation banned climbing boys from 1840 onwards and required mechanical brush equipment, the transition changed only the tools and not the income, and a mechanically equipped chimney sweep in the 1840s and 1850s could serve a larger circuit in less time at comparable pay. Number 12. The second-hand clothing dealer. As industrial workers' wages were ground down by machine displacement, the market for second-hand clothing in industrial cities expanded to serve millions of workers who could not afford new garments. Second-hand clothing dealers purchased cast-off garments from middle-class households, repaired and cleaned them, and sold them at prices working-class families could manage. In the industrial cities of the 1820s and 1830s, a dealer with a productive pitch near a factory gate could earn 8 to 12 shillings per week on stock that cost almost nothing to acquire and required only labor to prepare for resale. Second pattern break. This next one is where the math gets fascinating. Because the next entries describe how the most economically sophisticated working-class families did not simply survive the transition, but used specific methods to accumulate the capital that eventually moved them into the employing class rather than the employed. Number 11. The provision of lodging and board. As hundreds of thousands of rural workers flooded into industrial cities with no existing housing infrastructure, any habitable rooms became one of the period's most valuable assets. A working-class woman who controlled the tenancy of a 3-room cottage in a mill town could sublet one room to a single lodger for 2 shillings per week and a second room to a couple for 3 shillings, earning 5 shillings per week while herself living in the third room effectively rent-free. Over 50 years of industrial city growth, the women who managed lodging houses built the most durable income of any working-class economic strategy in the period. The women who managed the most successful lodging houses developed a genuine expertise in tenant assessment, building maintenance, and the management of conflicting household schedules that was as sophisticated as any commercial operation of the period. Several lodging house managers in Manchester and Birmingham are documented in the 1851 census as employing servants and owning property, having bootstrapped from a single spare room to a small property empire, using nothing but working-class capital and commercial discipline. Number 10. The truck and barter economy. In many industrial settlements, mill owners paid wages partly in truck, meaning credit at a company-owned shop. Workers who understood the informal market that developed around truck could extract additional value by trading their surplus truck credit for cash at a small discount with neighbors who needed company shop goods, arbitraging the gap between truck credit and cash in a system the mill owners had designed to prevent precisely this flexibility. Number 9. The combination of 2 or 3 marginal trades. Samuel Fletcher did not find a single replacement for his lost weaving income. He found 3. He took in knitting for a hosiery factor at 2 shillings per week. He ran a small credit operation lending pennies to neighbors at a penny in the shilling per week return. And he used his literacy to write letters and petitions for neighbors who could not write, charging 6p per document. Individually, none of these activities paid a living wage. Combined, they returned 8 to 9 shillings per week, more than he had earned in his final years as a handloom weaver after prices had collapsed. The families who survived the transition were usually those who understood that flexibility across several small income streams was more robust than dependence on any single trade. Number 8. The Sunday market and off-day trade. The 6-day factory week left most industrial workers only Sundays for independent commercial activity, but Sunday markets in industrial cities were significant events serving workers who had no other shopping opportunity. A worker who supplemented his factory wage with Sunday market trading, selling produce from an allotment garden, second-hand tools acquired during the week, or homemade food prepared on Saturday, could add 3 to 5 shillings to his weekly income without conflicting with his factory employment. Number 7. The industrial school teaching. Literacy in the industrial cities was not universal, and workers who could read and write found themselves in possession of a skill that neighbors would pay for. An industrial worker who organized evening or Sunday classes for 2 or 3 dozen children or adults at a penny or 2p per pupil per week earned 5 shillings from 2 or 3 evening sessions rather than full working days. The dame schools and penny reading schools that proliferated in industrial cities were mostly operated by working-class women with no formal qualification beyond functional literacy and the organizational ability to manage a room full of children. Third pattern break. Here is where the story becomes personal, because the next entries are not about strategies for survival, but about specific human knowledge and physical skills that retained economic value even as machinery displaced everything around them. These are the trades that the machines could not replicate in 1800, and several of them could not replicate in 1850 either. Number 6. The skilled tool and instrument maker. The Industrial Revolution ran on machinery, and that machinery required constant skilled maintenance and repair that early factory workers could not provide. The precision tool makers and machine fitters who could diagnose mechanical problems and manufacture replacement parts by hand earned incomes at the very top of the working-class wage structure throughout the period. A skilled toolmaker in Birmingham in the 1820s earned between 25 and 35 shillings per week, more than 3 times the wage of an unskilled factory worker, and effectively insulated from the machine displacement destroying other trades because the machines themselves created the demand for his skill. Number 5. The market gardening supply trade. As industrial cities expanded and surrounding agricultural land was built over, the distance between urban consumers and fresh food grew steadily larger. Market gardeners, who established productive plots within cart-hauling distance of expanding industrial cities, enjoyed growing demand and stable prices throughout the Industrial Revolution. A market gardeners, supplying a productive 2-acre plot to Manchester or Leeds markets in the 1820s, could earn between £40 and £60 per year net of costs, an income essentially immune to machine displacement because no machine could replicate the seasonal knowledge of growing required to make it consistently profitable. Number 4. The pawnbroker and small money lender. As industrial wages became irregular and the factory system replaced the food security that agricultural self-sufficiency had provided, the demand for small short-term loans in industrial communities became enormous. A pawnbroker in a productive working-class district of Manchester or Glasgow in the 1820s and 1830s could earn between £100 and £200 per year from a business that required modest capital, a secure room, and the social intelligence to assess both the value of pledged goods and the creditworthiness of pledgers. Number 3. The itinerant food and drink seller in the industrial district. The factory workers of the early Industrial Revolution had no canteen, no lunch break, and no access to hot food during their 12 to 14-hour working days beyond what a street vendor could supply through a factory gate. The women who circulated around factory gates and construction sites, selling hot pies, soup, coffee, and ale, built some of the period's most reliable working-class incomes. A food seller working a productive industrial route in Birmingham or Manchester in the 1820s could earn between 12 and 20 shillings per week, working from pre-dawn preparation to midday distribution with the remainder of the day free. The capital required was minimal, and the skill required was knowing where the workers were and when they could buy. Number 2. The friendly society organizer and treasurer. As the factory system destroyed the informal mutual aid networks of agricultural village life, working-class people in industrial cities created voluntary insurance organizations called friendly societies to provide sickness pay and death benefits to their members. The founders and treasurers of these societies were the most financially sophisticated members of their communities, and the role carried formal authority and informal income from management fees and the use of society funds for short-term lending between disbursements. A friendly society treasurer, managing the funds of 200 or 300 member households in an industrial district, was handling sums of several £100s annually and earning social capital that often translated into commercial opportunity. Number 1. The combination of land, garden, and domestic production. At the very top of this list sits not a trade or a financial instrument, but a domestic strategy that the most resilient working-class families of the Industrial Revolution practiced with deliberate consistency. A factory worker's family in the 1820s who kept a pig in the yard, grew potatoes and vegetables in a garden strip, kept a few chickens, and produced their own bread and preserved food could live on a wage that would have left a family entirely dependent on purchased food in poverty. The combination of earned wages, domestic food production, and small supplementary trades created a layered income that was robust against the disruption of any single element. This was not nostalgia for a pre-industrial economy. It was the application of the most durable economic principle in human history: diversify your income sources, reduce your cash dependency, and produce what you consume wherever the cost of production is lower than the cost of purchase. These 20 lost trades share a single insight that every period of economic disruption eventually teaches. When the dominant economic system changes and the old ways of earning stop working, the people who survive are not those who resist the change or wait for it to reverse. They are the people who read the new economy's specific needs as clearly as they once read the old ones, the navvy who went from canal to railway, the handloom weaver who specialized upward into fine goods, the village packman who found that industrial workers needed retail services nobody was providing. Every transition creates gaps, and the gap is always an income opportunity for anyone willing to see it and fill it. Try one principle from this list this week. Identify what has been disrupted in your own economy, find the specific need that the disruption has left unmet, and offer what you have to fill it. Your ancestors built entire livelihoods on exactly this logic during the most disruptive economic transition in human history. The knowledge is still here. They knew. Now you know too.